Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. If Max Verstappen wins this weekend's Imola Grand Prix, he will surpass Lewis Hamilton as the driver with the highest win percentage in the sport since Jim Clark in 1968, but that seems a far more difficult challenge than Red Bull expected going into the weekend. Having bolted the upgrades onto their car, Verstappen and Perez had a horrible Friday in Imola. Verstappen says it can't get worse for the rest of the weekend with the way that car was performing, taking his frustrations out everywhere on the grid, having multiple trips through the gravel. Who are now the favourites for this Grand Prix? Is it Ferrari after their new upgrades, or Russell believes McLaren are the team that's going to win this race? Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comments below. Is the title fight well and truly back alive? Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. And Charles Leclerc was asked this question as well today: when are you going to become the world champion? And Charles Leclerc said, look, why not 2024? It's still possible this season. Let's go for it. This, by the way, is Mattia Binotto and Fred Vasseur, of course, overseeing two rather different eras at Ferrari. But I hear they are in the paddock sharing a conversation with Binotto's thinking, damn, maybe I could have done what Fred did and I would have had a rather better position. Now, this tweet has been deleted, but what it said was with regard to Mr. Vino, and I'm not going to try and pronounce the first name because it's not going to end especially well, but he was the chief aerodynamicist at Mercedes, and he has left the Brackley team. That is, I think this is even confirmed by Mercedes. James Allison said, oh, well, it's just, the ebbs and the flows of the state of Formula 1. But we know that Mike Elliott was effectively relieved from his position after the failure of the W14 and the carryover of some of those W13 concepts which failed. And in hindsight, maybe Mike Elliott had some good ideas up his sleeve there. But whatever the case is, Mercedes' no-blame culture seems to be coming somewhat under the microscope right now, because this guy apparently is gone, and Thomas Maher from Planet F1 says this was not of his own accord. This is effectively he's been fired from that role as chief aerodynamicist because it ain't working out. So they've lost lots of employees recently, Mercedes, to various teams. Now they're firing, it seems, some of their chief staff that have failed to deliver, shall we say, the car they were hoping for. So not the greatest sign for Merc. However, they were improved today. Must be said, of course, that we have seen this before this season when Mercedes turn up to the track and on Ferrari, they look okay, if not respectable. But as the weekend continues, then it starts to fall away from them. And Mercedes certainly aren't here with their new upgrades saying, oh, we're back, we're going to start to win races. And that doesn't seem to be the case on pure pace either. But they were today, Mercedes, faster in both qualifying and race sims than Red Bull, which is not something I thought I would say coming into this weekend, because after Miami, the big talking point turned to the further upgrades. Imola is typically the site of major upgrades for cars throughout the season. We saw this insane looking and very sophisticated floor edge, and even just comparing this floor edge of the RB20 now compared to what it was a year ago on the RB19, just, so much more complication that Red Bull have introduced on their car. Does that mean fast? Well, we had that question yesterday. Sure, it's Red Bull, they probably will make it work. But and it's not like Adrian Newey's departure has made them bad all of a sudden. But it is interesting timing, isn't it? That Newey confirms his departure around Miami. They don't win that Grand Prix, and now they seem in a bit of a predicament today. Genuinely, if there was a sprint race this weekend and there was no further practice, I think there's no way Red Bull would even be close to where they need to be. But they do have overnight to figure this out, and I wouldn't be surprised if they turn up tomorrow and they have a far better car. Would it be good enough? That's a big question, because Verstappen was not a happy man today, and you'd think the Red Bull from FP1 to FP2, they could have dialed some things in. It does happen, you bring upgrades to the cars, can take time to calibrate them, shall we say, get the right setup ideas and all this type of stuff, but it usually doesn't take forever to such an extent that Red Bull was so far off the pace all day, and Verstappen is understandably not a happy man. Alex Albon had lost power. I think it was Norris who had some sort of issues with like a system glitch that prevented him from going for some time, but that was then resolved, and they were fast on the day. Multiple drivers, though, were struggling here. This is Lewis Hamilton out in the gravel. I will say, it's great to see the gravel traps are properly back here. Like, if drivers make mistakes, if drivers push too hard, they go too wide, they should be punished in instances like this. And obviously, if you go off in the gravel and you get stuck, that's the end of your race, potentially, as we have seen in the past. So I think the gravel is great to bring back. It punishes the drivers more. Hamilton was struggling with the car as well, had a bit of a spin. So the new upgrades weren't perfectly calibrated for Mercedes either, but they kind of got there as the session went on. And in Russell's hands, they were very competitive in the first session, and to be fair, in the second session as well, wasn't too bad. However, Verstappen was having an awful time. I mean, this is right at the end of the this session where here he is on a purple first sector, and in the first sector, they were fine. The car's fast. Obviously, you get that long straight down to turn one. The Red Bull's obviously going to be fast there with the DRS open, and then you got the couple of chicanes. But when it came down to Acqua Minerale, and even the chicane following Acqua Minerale, certainly into the Acqua Minerale section of corners, they were bottoming out big time on the track leading in. The car was hitting the floor, it was destabilizing the car, and Verstappen simply couldn't get it to turn into the corner at the pace that he wanted to. Tricky corner anyway at the best of times, but the car just wasn't behaving well, which was surprising. And then even after Acqua Minerale going up the hill, he then couldn't get the car braked for the chicane, and Verstappen went off numerous times here trying to find the right spot to brake and trying to figure out what the car was going to do, but he just didn't have the grip, didn't have the consistency to execute how he wanted. Here he is off of the gravel at that point, actually, when he went off at Acqua Minerale, and he slammed the steering wheel like he was not a happy man, and he was taking his frustration out big time. I don't know if Verstappen feels like, oh, the championship is slipping away, because I don't really think that's in his mind. Verstappen wants to maximize every single weekend, and he wants to win every single race and dominate every single race and secure pole and everything that comes along with it. So I don't think Verstappen's thinking, oh damn, my car's kind of bad now, I'm not going to win the championship. I think Verstappen is still very confident that's no problem, because he does have a sizable points gap in the championship. But let's say Red Bull this weekend have the third fastest car. The championship is still alive. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It probably still takes a DNF from Verstappen, but who knows? If Ferrari are quick, if McLaren are quick, it's not necessarily over yet. But it also has to be remembered that it was only a couple of races ago where Verstappen was lapping a second a lap quicker than anybody else at China. So it's not like their car is bad, but it's just for whatever reason, they couldn't make it work today with the new upgrades, which is the fascinating part. This was the weekend where I think we were going to learn one of two things, and I think we still will. Either we have a season on our hands, or it's over, right? Because if Red Bull brought upgrades and they were still fastest, I think there's no way that any other team is going to do anything. But they've brought upgrades and they haven't found a way to make them work quite yet. They may in due course, but for now they were struggling big time in those section of corners. Their new floor edge upgrade, their new floor upgrade, their new front wing upgrade does not seem to be delivering what they hoped for at this type of circuit. And Verstappen says, yeah, everything is so difficult. This time suddenly the front grip's up a lot and I almost spin. So very inconsistent car. They've got the grip sometimes, they don't have the grip at other times. And this even was in the second session, I believe, where Verstappen was off again. Like, this guy couldn't keep the car on the track, which is rare for Max, obviously. Like, when you watch Max in full flow with the Red Bull underneath him, he's not making any corrections, he's not making any mistakes. It looks easy, but when the car isn't performing, then even the best drivers are going to have a hard time with it. So this was the results after the first session. The second session is probably more interesting, but look, Charles Leclerc towing the timesheets, a Ferrari 1-3, and that is absolutely worthy of note. They've brought substantial upgrades this weekend, Ferrari. They intend to be competing for pole, competing for the race victory with Max Verstappen of Red Bull. But Red Bull 2.5 tenths behind in the hands of both Perez and Max. And Leclerc was P1, but Russell was P2, splitting the two Ferraris in the Mercedes. And RB of Tsunoda was up here as well. And that remained true in the second session. This was the final practice session of the day. And yeah, you guys can see the numbers just about here as well. When Charles Leclerc, P1, this time a whole second quicker in better conditions. Piastri then in the McLaren was second, but a great lap from Leclerc, right? I mean, into the 115s. That is very interesting for the rest of the weekend, it's got to be said. I was hoping in practice we would see Ferrari be strong, McLaren be strong, and show some pace compared to the Red Bull. But even Mercedes, I mean, Hamilton ended P4. Sure, they're 4 tenths off, Hamilton and Russell, but that's not too bad. Maybe they can find more from their upgrades. But Tsunoda, P3, I mean, 4 tenths off himself. The RB was, even in race sims, like the 5th fastest car, faster than Aston Martin, who again was still struggling despite their upgrades. So a very interesting session, but notably, Verstappen, nowhere near the top of the timesheets. 5.5 tenths off, Perez 6.5 tenths off. Couldn't get the car working at all, and I expected after the first session, to be honest, that they would figure it out for session 2. That's not what happened, right? And Max is like, yeah, my God, I don't know what's going to happen. It's different every single time. So of course, asked to comment on this, Max said, balance in the car wasn't there. I did not feel comfortable. It actually was really bad in the long run too, which is usually when the Red Bull has sometimes had struggles with balance and getting the fronts to grip up and this type of stuff in, qualifying pace. But in the race trim, they're usually so strong. But the fact that the Red Bull wasn't even really good in the race runs, which has been its forte for the last couple of years, is actually rather fascinating. Whether I think it'll be better tomorrow, well, worse than today is not possible, he says. So that is quite a damning assessment. And also there was this, right? So Max was coming up through the end of the first sector, and he comes across Lewis Hamilton here, right? So he's on a fast lap, Hamilton's on a cool down, and sure, Hamilton couldn't really do much else in this moment. I think Hamilton's mistake, or maybe the team's mistake not telling Hamilton that Verstappen was on a fast lap behind him, and Hamilton apologized and said, look, my bad for getting in your way, because obviously not ideal, but I don't think it was like insanely egregious, right? I mean, Perez and Leclerc went to the stewards for a similar impeding drama. Perez got away with it. But yeah, after this happens, Verstappen just cuts across Hamilton here to basically just show him, like, I weren't happy with that, mate. And then, I mean, yeah, he like really aggressively cuts across him, throws his hand up in the air. And I don't think, necessarily, I mean, this is the actual, the play here. Look at that. Just cuts across him. And obviously Hamilton apologizes and Max has his hand in the air to say, like, what are you doing, sunshine? And look, I don't think you would see a response necessarily that animated from Verstappen if he wasn't frustrated about what was happening elsewhere. If Verstappen was dominating the session, P1 hands down by 0.3 of a second, I don't think he would be, throwing his hand up and weaving across Hamilton to, show his frustration, because clearly he was very frustrated. And even Hamilton mentioned this after the session. He said, yeah, geez, that was, a weird one. I was in the cool down lap. Yeah, it was my bad. But, I tried to apologize, but he was too frustrated already, it seems, with how the rest of the session was going. There was also from Bozzi, people, of course, analysing how's Bozzi's race engineering compared to Xavier Marcos's, who is now gone, somewhat surprisingly so, after Miami. And Leclerc says, look, can you check the power steering? Copy, we will check. So, we are checking. Some things that never change. But the W15, some quick comments on that before we discuss some of the long-run data, which is very fascinating. The W15 weren't too bad. Russell says it was great. So compared to how they've been for the start of the season, Mercedes seemed relatively optimistic about the pace of their car, and Hamilton said, yeah, we're a lot closer to the competition than we have been in recent rounds. But then again, they said the same thing back at like Bahrain. But to be fair, this time they have the full upgrade package. They had part of their upgrade package before. They brought the new floor, they brought the new side pod designs, and now they have a new beam wing. I think they've changed, I think maybe it's the side pods they brought here as well, actually, the new side pods, but they changed the floor and some other things back in Miami, and this time it's the new beam wing they brought to the car as well. So they've changed a couple of things now. Now that all works well together, they do seem to have taken a step. But it makes things very interesting for the weekend, right? Because going into the weekend, we thought, okay, it's going to be Ferrari maybe with their upgrades. McLaren are going to be strong after what we saw in Miami. And even McLaren say their car should work better here than it did in Miami. And then, of course, you've got, Red Bull, who should be back on top with their upgrades. But the fact that Mercedes aren't too far off the pace means that if one of those teams drops the ball, potentially even Red Bull, then Mercedes could pick up the slack, right? I mean, they were the third fastest team today, Mercedes, ahead of Red Bull in both low and high fuel running, and therefore that left Ferrari and McLaren as the fastest teams in both qualifying and race simulations. Red Bull absolutely struggling. This caused lots of traction, and we can see this as well in the long run data. So this is the average race pace over the kind of runs that were done, some on the hards, some on the mediums, but worthy to look at regardless. So Piastri, he was the fastest guy on track on the hard compounder tyre, averaging at 120.7, and okay, there's talk about some of these laps are slightly strange, some get excluded, some get included, some get held up by traffic, some, obviously don't get to complete final laps and stuff like this. So it's always data to be taken with a grain of salt, but generally speaking, people do a pretty good job putting together data which is relatively accurate to what was shown on the track. But Piastri was the fastest man. The hards were looking good, a 120.7 on average. Leclerc on the mediums was right there at a 120.7. Sainz a good few tenths back, actually, so maybe Leclerc with these upgrades feeling more confident than Sainz so far. Guess we'll tell. Norris was right there with Piastri and Leclerc on the mediums. Then you found the two Mercedes, averaging a 129, 120.10, which is what Hamilton and Russell were doing respectively. Then you had Perez on the mediums with a 121.1, Sainz was there, and then Verstappen a 121.3. So Verstappen 6 tenths a lap off the pace of Leclerc on the same compounded tyre, 5 tenths a lap off the pace of Norris on the same compounded tyre, and yeah, this is why Verstappen was saying the car was awful, I was struggling, it can't get any worse than this. So how does this translate for the rest of the weekends? Will this be maintained? Is this what we have to deal with for the remainder of time? Are Red Bull going to continue to struggle? Look, we've thought that before, and they've put it together. But, and it does still, it's remarkable to me that it wasn't long ago in China that they were just so much faster than everybody. And in the last couple of races, that seems to have now turned somewhat on its head. So I'm never going to bet against Verstappen to win a race because he's won such a ridiculously high percentage. But it's going to take something from Red Bull, right? Like, they're going to need to turn up tomorrow and understand these upgrades, if they even are upgrades. The other point, I guess, is Aston Martin, because they brought upgrades, apparently, but they haven't done much yet, and it's interesting to note that team, right, because where they started 2023, now they've regressed massively over the last couple of years, and here they are not even making the top list, right? I mean, here are the top top 8 drivers, no Aston Martin figures in there, no Alonso data, no Stroll data, and that's because they're simply not competitive. But actually, after these 8 drivers, some of the next fastest guys were the likes of Tsunoda, Ricciardo, right, in the RB, and that car is right now looking more competitive than the Aston Martin is. So all of a sudden, instead of RB and teams like that being the teams that say, hey, we need points down to 12th because we want to get points on the board, it might now be Aston Martin that are saying, hey, how about points down to 12th because we might need it somewhat desperately, right? But even Russell said after the session that he reckons McLaren might still be the team to beat. I mean, their long-run pace, of course, looked good in the hands of Piastri and in the hands of Norris. They won in Miami, of course, with Lando Norris in the car, and Piastri had a very good race as well until, unfortunately, the contact with Sainz at the end ended his Grand Prix. So Russell's saying, yeah, they're going to win potentially this weekend. Ferrari are looking good in front of the Tifosi. Mercedes aren't far away. And Red Bull, they're in the conversation. They're never out of the conversation. But, man, if this weekend goes as it looks like from Friday, this series, or this season, honestly, really started to open up. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Qualifying tomorrow and the race on Sunday will tell us an awful lot about what we are going to see here over the coming weeks and months. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.